And there's a decrease in the number of healthy churches in many ways, and that's a concern to me, that we need to have, by God's grace, see some of these churches revitalized, because the witness of Christ is necessary in the communities where they are, but also to the ends of the earth. But sometimes older established churches are also, can be resistant to...
Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it, right? To revitalize them.
Right, it's a significant part of it, because they can get locked in. I mean, years ago, I read a book. It was actually written, I guess, like 31 years ago. It's called To Dream Again by a guy named Robert Dale. That I don't endorse, just outside the Bible, I don't endorse anything in any book. But he used... I was actually, at the time, I was working through my doctoral program, and I was working on the issue of church revitalization, philosophy of ministry type of things. And I actually was fairly far into the process, but then I came across that book and read it, and he had a graphic in it that really actually paralleled some of the things that I was developing and wanting to think about and teach, in which he charted the health cycle of a church on sort of a bell curve that started at the lower end with a dream. He used those kinds of labels. It was actually dream and beliefs, goals, structure, and at the top of the bell curve was ministry. And what he said is that healthy churches go through it. They have some kind of a dream that they're pursuing. They solidify their beliefs, establish goals, develop a structure to try and do that, and they have their heyday of ministry. But then down the other side of that bell curve was a process as well that I thought I had seen. And actually, every time I've explained to people, people start to nod their heads, and that is from the peak of ministry, they go to a stage of nostalgia, where they start to talk about the way things used to be. Then they move to a level of questioning. Why isn't it like it used to be? And then to a level of polarization, where people come up with different answers to the question. Well, here's what I think, and those people cluster together, and no, this is what my view is, and they cluster together. So the church becomes very polarized, and if nothing's done to resolve it, then it starts to turn to dropout. Now, just about every time in the 23 years since I read that book and have talked with pastors and done presentations, I mean, almost just reflexively they start to nod, because they can all think of churches that fit that pattern. And sometimes because the upward cycle has been associated with a dynamic leader, that church has gone through that path and then start downward, either in the later years of that dynamic leader's ministry or shortly after he's left or been replaced. And so they all have seen that. And I think that, coupled with the tendency through the middle of the 20th century to have all church growth be centered in one location, that loads of churches during the prosperous, booming years kept drawing bigger and bigger crowds, building bigger and bigger buildings, and then are left trying to sustain those things. And the reality of it is, you have small congregations inside these big shells that are really struggling with their existence. And I mean, my guess is every one of us can start to think about situations like that. And the challenge is, there are young men who really, I think, can have a burden for and would be good fits, good leaders in those kinds of a context, if folks would really come to grips with what's gone on. I mean, really, what is at stake? Because the tendency is to look outside of ourselves and sort of blame it. I mean, the culture's changed, the demographics have changed. We don't have this thing we used to have or that thing we used to have, and not really take a good look at the church itself and assess whether the answer is there. And a lot of times there's just knee-jerk reactions. Okay, so we're on the downhill side, and people are having nostalgia and start to question, and their immediate answer is, well, we just need to get a new pastor, or we need to get a new youth pastor. So they want to just change personnel, and that's one of the things that Dale points out. I mean, immediately people just think we can just change this rapidly by changing the person, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. And it might not always work for the right reason, because all they do is they come back in, and now everyone rallies around a charismatic, dynamic leader again. So they postpone the problem, but start it again. A lot of churches do it by changing their policies. That is, instead of taking a good look at what's going on, they think they can just do some kind of a shift. Well, we were this kind of a church before, now we're going to be this kind of a church. Or we had this kind of a position, now we're just going to sort of change that position. So they think that that's the key. If we'll just become something different than what we are, it'll work. Or probably the most common is program stuff. So it's run after the next program that's going to cause the church to grow, because a lot of the stuff that pushed it up were programs that worked, which aren't working so anymore. So the answer is really get some new programs. And all of those, I think, are not going to produce the real revitalization that needs to happen. I mean, the core of it has to be, it's actually coming all the way back down to that bottom. I don't like the way that Dale called it. He called it dream and then beliefs. But I think if you thought there of a clear, definite biblical purpose, or sometimes mission, or sometimes we vision for ministry that's grounded in the authority of the Word of God. If you come back to that and begin to work your way up, instead of jumping up at the top, it was dream, beliefs, goals, structure. People tend to make structural changes. Let's change the staff. Let's change the programs. Let's change some policies we have. And none of that actually will revitalize the church. To be filled with life again, then people have to become convinced of a genuinely biblical, I think, God-centered purpose for their ministry.